This is another extraordinary thing about the Epstein story. Donald Trump has been able to distract from almost everything else. Almost every story in Trump 2.0 has a shelf life of about what, one news cycle, two news cycles. You know how this is. At the end of the week, you look back and say, what was the big scandal on Monday? Because I forget. This has been different because it just won't go away.
Charlie Sykes, political commentator and author of How the Right Lost Its Mind. Thank you so much for joining the Trump Report again today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
We have to, of course, start off with the fact that we've seen these emails from Jeffrey Epstein's estate drop. We saw a few days ago these three released by these oversight Democrats where Epstein claimed that Trump knew about girls, that he'd spent hours with the victim, which later was reportedly Virginia Giuffre. And then we saw the House oversight drop 20,000 documents with emails that obviously don't incriminate Donald Trump, but his name is mentioned multiple times. So this is dominating the news cycle. But Charlie, CNN asked a Republican about whether these emails raise any questions, to which he replied, not right now, no. So what do you think about that?
Well, of course, they raise questions. I mean, these stories are not going to go away, and these emails are basically just the appetizer for what's happening. And what I wrote the other day was the dam has not burst yet, because we all know what's coming. And so, this week we had the 218th vote in the House of Representatives to have a vote on releasing the files. There's about to be a massive Republican jailbreak. Dozens, if not perhaps as many as 100 Republican representatives are going to break with Trump and vote to release all of these Epstein files. Now, that's extraordinary because this is a normally compliant House of Representatives. Donald Trump spent the day, the other day, in this fevered attempt to block this vote. And I think this is the key thing that have raised a lot of eyebrows. That Donald Trump is spending an extraordinary amount of political capital in maintaining this cover-up. So if there's nothing there, why is he doing this? The Wall Street Journal editorial board has a piece out on Friday saying, Donald Trump is his own worst enemy because the way he's behaving, it certainly raises the question that there's some bombshell that he's worried about in those files. So, of course, it raises questions.
Do these emails show that there is a stronger connection between Trump and Epstein and call into question really whether Trump is lying about what he knows about Epstein, what he maybe witnessed in his time as Epstein's friend?
Well, the short answer is yes to all of those things. I mean, part of it is we need to distinguish between what is evidence in a court of law and what we actually know. And there's really been, as you point out, there's not a smoking gun that suggests that he's committed a crime that would certainly hold up in a court of law. However, it is not a mystery that Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein were buddies and go way, way, way back. I mean, there are pictures. There's just a long, long paper trail. So to a certain extent, the emails don't tell us something we didn't know. The emails remind us of something that has been front and center for years, this relationship. So Donald Trump, lives in his own alternative reality, has been denying that he had this relationship, denying that he did a variety of things. It's shredding that story, but that story was never that credible to begin with. So the question is, and again, I have to say there is part of this that is puzzling to me, which is that think about all the things that Donald Trump has survived. He's a convicted felon. He was indicted many, many times. He's been accused, he was found liable in a federal court here of sexually abusing a woman. He tried to overthrow the government with a violent attack on the Capitol. And yet, he still got elected, right? He has survived all of that. He stood in the middle of Fifth Avenue and committed all of these crimes and didn't lose any votes. He grabbed women by the you-know-what. None of that had any effect. So what makes Trump think that this is different? He has been Teflon on almost every other issue. So what is it about this particular case that he's decided to draw a bright red line, especially after his base has been ginned up for years? One of the reasons we're talking about this is the MAGA base has been talking about this for years. His people, have been promising complete transparency. So again, that's the big question mark I have, is why has a guy who survived everything so worried about this?
Mm. And the emails show that Jeffrey Epstein kept a close eye on Donald Trump after their fallout, especially at the time that he was running for the 2016 election, and then once he won. So these emails, Charlie, they show a very calculated side between Jeffrey Epstein and other people such as Michael Wolff. They're wondering what they can get out of Trump. They're wondering what they could hang over his head. There are other emails where they're tracking where he's about to fly to. They're sharing articles about Donald Trump. Epstein even says he can take Trump down, and they're discussing which lawyer Donald Trump is planning on hiring. There's one email where he, says to a reporter, "Do you want photos of Donald Trump with girls in bikinis at my house?" So when you're looking at these emails, does it look as if Epstein had it out for Trump?
Yeah, there's no question about it. They had a breakup, and there's a good deal of maliciousness there. But what you're pointing out, though, is the possibility that Jeffrey Epstein tried to or wanted to blackmail Donald Trump, that he was shopping compromat to others. He was in touch with the Russians. Who knows what information he passed on and what that could possibly be. So yeah, and this is why this story is legitimate. Is there evidence that possibly the president of the United States has been compromised in some way, that he is vulnerable to this kind of blackmail? I mean, that's one of the fundamental questions you ask when you're talking about security clearances, right? Do you trust somebody? Can this person be blackmailed? Is there something dark in their past that could be used against them to obtain leverage? And that's one of the subtexts of this story. It's a very important subtext of this story.
And do you think the Trump administration will use that to their advantage when they're trying to push this narrative away? They'll say, look, clearly Jeffrey Epstein had it out for Donald Trump. He wanted to look as if he had something over him, that he could blackmail him, that he could use all these things to his advantage. And of course, he ended up dying a few months after some of these more scandalous emails from him. But yeah, I wonder if that's the route that the Trump administration, the White House go down in order to protect Trump.
Well, I'm not sure that that's a very persuasive argument to make to the public at this point. And again, I mean, we need to just go back a few months to remember how Donald Trump's FBI Director Kash Patel, his Attorney General Pam Bondi, were promising that we were going to uncover this massive international sex trafficking ring and how they were going to expose it all. So the reversal is pretty dramatic. And again, this is another extraordinary thing about the Epstein story. Donald Trump has been able to distract from almost everything else. Almost every story in Trump 2.0 has a shelf life of about what, one news cycle, two news cycles. You know how this is. At the end of the week, you look back and say, what was the big scandal on Monday? Because I forget. This has been different because it just won't go away. So here we are. The Congress comes back this week. What dominates the headlines? The Epstein story. What's going to dominate the headlines next week when they have a vote on the Epstein files? What's going to be the next week when the Senate votes on it? And then Donald Trump is going to have to veto this piece of legislation. Now, this pretty much guarantees that this is going to be in the headlines for the next month. My big question is, what will he do to distract from this story if he is really concerned about it? The day that he vetoes this, it would be speculative on my part to suggest there would be a wag the dog. But if you were looking for a date on your calendar of a war with Venezuela, you might want to connect the dots.
Well, I mean, Charlie, the only people that can get something out of this really is Ukraine. You would hope that Donald Trump would use the Russia-Ukraine conflict as a distraction, picking up the phone to Zelensky, offering some more military aid, get him in the good books again, calling Putin to condemn him, saying if you don't come to the negotiating table and say yes to a ceasefire, dropping weapons at the battle lines. I mean, that's kind of the best case scenario.
Yes. Well, there are no really best case scenarios, but yes, that would be my preference. My guess is, having watched the mind of Donald Trump for this last decade, is that he's going to want to show. He's going to want to have something that's much more visual. He's going to want to blow things up. But again, just going back to this, I mean, this Epstein story is the one story that he can't shake, and it really is extraordinary because and again, I want to keep coming back to all of this. Why do you have special meetings in the Situation Room this week where they call in Congressman Lauren Boebert, who is a MAGA loyalist, and browbeat her, take your name off this discharge petition? Why do you go, so far to stamp this out? And the problem is that normally his instincts in distracting are pretty good. I have to admit, but everything he's done to quash this story has made it bigger. I mean, this is the thing. It is like the Sorcerer's Apprentice. The more he tries to kill the story, the more legs it seems to have. So I do think that this is a real problem. And by the way, this is also coming at a time when his poll numbers are incredibly low. He's having some pushback from the Supreme Court. This really comes at a bad moment for his presidency, and it's premature to say that he's feeling like a lame duck. I'm not saying that, but I am saying that term is coming up more and more. The willingness of Republicans to break with him, to criticize him, it's just an interesting development. It's not something we've seen before.
And it's premature to say that this scandal may, I guess, be a dampen on his presidency, Charlie, because he's only, not even a year into it. But when we look back on what scandals defined a presidency, we look at Joe Biden and know that his age, and of course that uh, disastrous debate with Donald Trump obviously defined his presidency in the end. So it'll be interesting to see how far this goes on, because it's been going for months now. It'll be interesting to see if it lasts another 6 months. But Republican Congressman Pete Sessions, he was asked by CNN why he thinks the White House is working so hard to keep Epstein information from being released. His response was probably for the same reason that Obama and Biden's administration did not release this data. So Thomas Massey said yesterday that there are a few reasons why he thinks that they could be, trying so hard to avoid this. But he said one of the reasons could be that the Trump administration might be looking to protect intelligence on sex trafficking. So what do you make of that could be one of the reasons why they're so reluctant from this being made public?
Well, now we're going deep into the rabbit hole of speculation. I want to make that clear, but I think that is plausible. One of the mysteries about the Epstein story is, why did he get so many sweet deals? What happened down in Florida when the prosecutors looked at the case and decided, yeah, this guy is untouchable? Did somebody come in the office and say, if you do this, you will compromise sources and methods, or look who you will implicate? Look, there's going to be a lot of Democrats who are going to be caught up in that, a lot of famous people. It is amazing to me, the circle that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were able to put together. So there's a lot of fallout, and quite frankly, there's the question of, is Melania going to be in these files in any way? Is Trump protecting his wife? Is he protecting the intelligence community? We just don't know. The one thing we do know is that Donald Trump will always put himself ahead of anyone else. So the most plausible, the easiest explanation is that Donald Trump knows he's in those files, and there's something about what's in those files that he does not want to come out. So he is in the position of a very, very high profile cover up. We have a cliche, as you well know, that the cover up is worse than the crime. Now, that's not appropriate here because the crimes are pretty serious. We are talking about the sex trafficking and abuse of young women, some of whom are no longer alive. So the crimes are really, really grave. But what is extraordinary is the way that the cover-up is continuing to elevate and make this story bigger and bigger and bigger.
And of course, the break from the Republican Party votes, as you mentioned, Charlie. So Thomas Massey he has these 218th signatures needed to force this vote, as you said. They've said that this will probably happen early next week, the vote to release the Epstein files. This, of course, includes 4 Republicans who have gone against the party, including Thomas Massie. So he said to CNN that he has more Republicans quietly telling him that they plan to vote to release the Epstein files next week, predicting that that number could actually snowball. So do you see that happening, more people breaking rank with Trump?
Yes, I do, and I think that that's going to be really quite an extraordinary story. The senior Republicans are telling reporters that it will be dozens, as many as 100. Now, keep in mind how rare that kind of show of independence is, how much pressure Donald Trump was putting on people like Lauren Boebert to switch their votes. If we're talking dozens, that's the reason why people start like floating out the idea of lame duck. Just before you and I began this taping, I was on another radio show, and I was the guest right after a Republican congressman from New York who went through all of the Trumpist spin about, this is cynical. Why didn't Biden release all of this? And then at the end, he was asked by the host, well, how will you vote when this comes up on the floor? And he says, I'll vote yes. I'll probably vote yes. So having bought all of the Republican spin up until that moment, he was going, yeah, I'm not going to be the guy who's going to stand up on the floor of the House of Representatives and vote to cover up for, sex trafficking pedophiles.
Well, I want to read out what Thomas Massie said because it's an interesting quote. This is what he actually said. He said, the deal for Republicans on this vote is that Donald Trump will protect you if you vote the wrong way. In other words, if you vote to cover up for pedophiles, you've got cover in a Republican primary. But I would remind my colleagues that this vote is going to be on your record longer than Trump is going to be president. So, I mean, that is a very interesting way to spin it, Charlie. Will Republicans look at that as a fact? It is a fact that Thomas Massie has said, Donald Trump can only be president until 2028. He can go as far as he can to, I guess, destabilize their primary elections, but and midterm elections if they're up for it. But will they take this threat seriously from Trump, or they will listen to Thomas Massie?
Well, Thomas Massie is absolutely correct in his description of the politics. And keep in mind that Donald Trump has already targeted Thomas Massie. He's already said that he is going to take him out. He's already raising money. And Massie is not blinking. But he's correct. And the phrasing of that quote that you read, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of what Liz Cheney said during the January 6th hearing when she says, to my fellow Republicans, think about your long-term honor, that your handling of this will, be your historic record. And Republicans made the calculation, we are not willing to buck Donald Trump. We're not willing to buck Donald Trump on January 6th. So what does it say, Maddie, if next week dozens or maybe 100 of Republicans decide, but we're going to buck Donald Trump on the Epstein files? Because the dynamic is, as Thomas Massie said, if you vote with Trump, even if it's unpopular, he's got your back. Now, 99.9% of the time, that calculation has worked for Donald Trump, and it's worked in keeping Republicans in line. So what does it tell us if it doesn't work next week? What's changed in the power dynamic? What's changed in the political climate? And see, that's what makes this so interesting from just a raw political point of view in terms of the relationship of Trump, who's been able to count on absolute loyalty in the House up until this moment.
And Republican Senator John Kennedy, he said, I don't think this issue is going to go away until it's answered to the American people's satisfaction. And I may end up with a sombrero on my head for saying that. So in other words, Charlie, he knows that he might be, risking condemnation from Donald Trump, but he also says that, in other words, that these files are a ticking time bomb getting ready to drop, and Americans, including Republicans, won't let this issue go.
Well, and again, we keep having to ask the question, so why would this be different? Well, because this story, is well understood by the Republican base. They have marinated in this story for years and years and years. What makes this different is this is not something that the MSNBC folks were obsessed about. This is not something that was cooked up by the Democrats. This is something that Republicans, the MAGA world, the QAnon folks have been pushing out into their universe, and people really, really, really care about it. So the one thing that Donald Trump has really been good at, he's very good at tapping into the anxieties and the concerns of people in the base. But what he is now finding is the limit in his power, that he can't turn off the switch that he turned on. He can't say, you need to passionately care about this, and let me tell you why you should passionately care about this. Oh, wait, never mind. There's nothing there. Not even Donald Trump's, power to twist reality into his own image is that powerful in this case.
One of the big stories last week, and I guess throughout the government shutdown, was, of course, the fact that newly elected Congresswoman Adelita Grijalva hadn't been sworn in yet. It was very bizarre to see that situation. She waited for 50 days to be sworn in, finally sworn in this week by Mike Johnson. So Thomas Massey said he's actually apologized to Adelita Grijalva on behalf of the Republican Party for delaying the swearing in. Democrats, as I mentioned, and some Republicans believe that, Mike Johnson deliberately kept the House on recess to avoid swearing her in, as she was this final 218th signature needed to force this vote on releasing the Epstein files. So in this case, Charlie, how bad does that look for Trump and his inner circle that they went to such great lengths as to keep the House on recess, if that is the case, and to, avoid swearing a elected Congresswoman into her seat, and she wasn't even able to, start work?
Well, I think that question answers itself. It was terrible. I mean, and without any historic precedence whatsoever. I mean, think about this. And by the way, I think that is accurate. I think that's why the House was in recess. But again, think how remarkable that is, that Mike Johnson would shut down the House of Representatives of the United States of America for more than a month in order to prevent this one elected Congresswoman from signing a document. I mean, what better indication that there is that there might be some fire under all of that smoke? I mean, this was really an embarrassment, and she called him out in her maiden speech for an abuse of power. It was the kind of thing that, again, you don't have to be a left-wing Democrat to say this is just insane. She wins the election. When you win an election, you're sworn in and you take office. And Mike Johnson never came up with a good explanation for why he would wait 50 days. So, of course, the most obvious explanation is that he was willing to shut down the entire Congress of the United States in order to prevent this vote.
Megyn Kelly, Charlie, she's trending online, of course, the podcaster, after comments she made on her podcast about Jeffrey Epstein. She basically said that Epstein was into the barely legal type of girls, acknowledging that while that is disgusting in itself, he wasn't into 8-year-olds. She said that he wasn't into 8-year-olds, that he liked very young teen types who would pass for even younger than they were, but would look legal to be a passerby. She said, I don't know what's true about him, but we're yet to see anybody come forward and say, I was 8, I was under 10, I was under 14 when I first came within his purview. But you can say that's a distinction without a difference. There's a difference between a 15-year-old and a 5-year-old, So she's come under a lot of scrutiny online for basically saying that there's a difference between being a pedophile to a 15-year-old girl than being a pedophile to a 5-year-old girl. And then, of course, the online commentary is basically that all pedophilia is bad, that a 15-year-old girl, can't even drive, that a 15-year-old girl, still doesn't have consent and it's still illegal. So what's your reaction to this backlash?
Well, I'm actually writing about it in my newsletter today. As soon as we're done, I'm going to finish it off. And the headline is going to be, I'll give you a preview, is like, why are we even talking about this? Here we are in Donald Trump's world, and we have to make distinctions between being are you a pedophile, or are you just into teenage girls? And by the way, 15-year-old is not barely legal in this country. That is still below the age of consent. That is still illegal. So why is Megyn Kelly twisting herself into pretzels to come up with some sort of a distinction that, okay, and I have seen others essentially saying, okay, so Donald Trump might have had sex with teenage girls, but that doesn't mean that he's a pedophile. Okay, people, let's just take a deep breath here. The whole thing is beyond horrific. The abuse is well documented. We're also getting the story the same day that Megyn Kelly has decided to demonstrate her broken brain here. And by the way, I am old enough to remember when she was a serious, really thoughtful commentator. I was actually a fan for a long time. And you watch what is necessary now, how this window of what you find acceptable is moving on the right. It is really appalling on a regular basis. But this story comes out the same day that we find out that Donald Trump's first choice to be Attorney General, Matt Gaetz, he was having sex with a 17-year-old girl who was living in a homeless shelter and was just trying to get enough money to buy herself braces. And a grown ass man who's a congressman of the United States was willing to exploit this situation. Okay, so is that pedophilia? Well, perhaps not technically. What's the who cares what you call it? I think we all recognize what's happening here, who these people are, and the conduct they're engaged in. And there's no way to rationalize it. But keep in mind that this was somebody that Donald Trump wanted to make the chief law enforcement officer of the United States, Matt Gaetz.
Charlie Sykes, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.